in Bangladesh. My name is Michael Green. I'm the Director of Government Relations and Strategic Development at Seamless, based out of Sanam S4 Group's Washington, DC office. For those who are not familiar with us, Seamless optimizes complex international finance, HR, and compliance-related operations, and accelerates global expansion for nonprofit organizations. Our Seamless service has supported hundreds of millions of dollars of development and research funding from major public and private donors, mainly for implementing organizations. We're happy to be an industry partner to Humentum. A big shout out to Humentum for helping us promote today's event to their membership, which includes nonprofits, and they support their nonprofit members with a range of HR, finance, tax, and other operational issues. Overseeing a number of projects and organizations related to compliance and the startup and scale up of operations. Seamless operates across Asia, and I'm working on a number of projects in LATAM and other markets as well. Our Global Alliance team has partners like LightCastle, who we're really happy to have with us here today in markets to provide our clients added insight into the trends and local nuances of doing business from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Today we'll be taking Q&A after the presentation that Zahed will be delivering here shortly. We also encourage you to, write your questions into the chat box as he goes through the presentation, so that we can pick them up at the latter part of today's session. So with that, just want to thank LightCastle. Thanks Zahed for this amazing presentation, and hope you all enjoy it. And like I said, feel free to drop your questions into the chat box and we'll take them up at the end of the session. So Zahed, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity. I will briefly try to give the backdrop of the Bangladesh's economic context vis-a-vis the overall development landscape, a bit on the historic overview of the donor funding landscape, how Bangladesh has fared over the first 30 years of its independence, followed by what has happened over the last 20 years from 2000 to 2020. Alongside, we will be talking a bit about what are the overarching factors which are impacting the overall donor funding landscape, and what are the thematic areas which will have a greater impact in the coming days, and what are the trends which are going to manifest itself as Bangladesh becomes a middle-income nation within the next 4 to 5 years. Before going into details, let me just take the opportunity to tell you a bit more about Bangladesh's economic performance in general. Since Bangladesh's independence back in 1971, after a very calamitous war where almost all our infrastructure had been destroyed, and with more than 50% of the population below the absolute poverty line, the country was in shambles. Apart from the economic situations, the country also being a delta had a series of natural calamities, natural disasters like cyclones, flooding, which had a continuous impact on the Bangladesh's economy. And many a times Bangladesh's economy was mentioned as a basket case, unfortunately, but we were in a dire situation. In terms of economic situation, we were very much behind our regional peers, very much behind our regional peers, and our GDP per capita was comparatively half compared to our erstwhile partner in West Pakistan. Bangladesh honestly has come far over the last 50 years. As you can see in the graph, you'll see that the GNI per capita has grown at a significant pace. Currently, it stands over 2,200 USD. And for the first time in 2020, Bangladesh has crossed the per capita GDP mark of India as well. So in a way, in terms of per capita GDP, I think we are comparatively more affluent. We have also left behind Pakistan, our erstwhile partner, over the last 5 to 7 years. And we have seen a significant impact in terms of poverty alleviation. If you could see the figures, you'll see that 38% of the population was earning below the $1.9 per day mark, which has somewhat decreased to 14.3% in 2016, and the figure should be a bit low on the lower side in 2021, 2022. Having said that, there are quite a few factors which have contributed to this significant performance. Some of them being positive government policies over the year, which has supported the private sector. The country's apparel sector has been a big boon for the country, generating $35 billion in revenue and export earnings, and placing Bangladesh as the second largest apparel player, followed by remittance earning. A lot of close to 1.2 million Bangladeshis are currently working in different countries, including the Middle East and a few other developed countries, and they are sending back remittances, which has crossed more than 20 billion last year. So we have done quite well, and the trickle-down economics has also had an impact. But having said that, donors historically also had a major impact on the country's inclusive growth in a way, particularly given the fact that government wasn't able to provide basic services like healthcare, nutrition, education, and other basic services. Donors and implementation agencies had stepped in by providing basic services like healthcare, educational services, and other things. As a result, you will see that Bangladesh's HDI index has been improving, starting from 1990 when it was 0.39 to 2019 when it was 0.63. When you do a comparison with the other country, apart from India, and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh's HDI ranking is better off compared to the other countries in the region, and this has been possible due to the continued support from the donors, both bilateral and multilateral development agencies, and also the development partners, including INGOs and NGOs who have been operating. Bangladesh, as we know, has graduated as a lower middle income country, and it's going to graduate as a middle income nation in 2026, and it's going to graduate from the LDC status. A few things have happened over the last 2-3 years. Bangladesh's perception among the international community has evolved, as you would know. And as I have mentioned before, Bangladesh's GDP per capita had surpassed that of India for the first time in the country's 50 years history. Alongside, Bangladesh's image has been evolving from that of a donor recipient to a country which is providing funding and donation and donor funding to neighboring countries. If I could give 2 specific examples, you will see that Bangladesh has recently engaged in a FX swap deal with Sri Lanka, since the country was facing significant financial difficulties. And in the recent past, the government has also supported Sudan with debt relief worth $7.7 million, and it's quite surprising to see. If you could also see our country's economic performance, despite the pandemic, the country has performed quite well. The growth momentum, the GDP growth momentum has been maintained despite the economic uncertainties. And the country has maintained its growth momentum, and it's in stark comparison to what has happened in India and Myanmar. If I take a look at the development landscape, what has happened over the last first 30 years of the country's independence, you'll see that almost 1/3 of the donor funding was in the form of food aid after the war. As we know, we had a significant infrastructure deficit. Alongside donors and implementers, and also prioritized building of roads and bridges and other things which had happened due to G2G based funding. Alongside, we also had a food deficit as well. Our population did not have access to enough food commodities and food, and donor funding contributed to alleviating that deficit. Alongside, we have also seen that the country has done quite well through other means as well. Due to the advent of the RMG sectors, a lot of erstwhile rural workers, particularly females, had received some form of employment, which had a trickle-down effect on the rural economy as well, which also improved the overall living standard in the rural local economy, and significantly improved the overall situation. Over the last 10 to 20 years, we have seen that bilateral donor agencies have been surpassed in terms of funding by the multilateral development agencies, organizations like World Bank, ADB, IMF, and a few other entities. And they have been increasingly providing infrastructure-led investments, oftentimes through G2G funding, alongside other support as well. And as we have seen in 2000s, Bangladesh had, due to the Green Revolution, Bangladesh had finally achieved self-sufficiency in food production, and we don't currently require any kind of food assistance from any country, which is a remarkable achievement. If I look at some of our major donors, we'll see that there are quite a few, which includes United States, the Japanese government, the Dutch government. United Kingdom is one of our major donors as well, apart from Switzerland. If you look at the diagram on the side, you'll see that some of these major donors have been quite involved, bilateral donors have been quite involved in certain areas, which includes agriculture, forestry, education, energy, food aid, as we have seen, has declined over the last 10, 15 years. They have also provided support in terms of industry, mining, transportation, water and sanitation, wash, and trade and tourism as well. In terms of specialization, we'll see that the United States have been focusing more on agriculture, fish, food aid. Japanese government has been particularly specializing on energy, transport, and communication, among others. Dutch particularly focused on wash and education, apart from the other subsectors. And the UK government also has significant investments funding in Bangladesh, and education is one of their key areas. The Swiss government has been also investing in education, wash, agriculture, forestry, and fishing as well, among other sectors. As we know, the COVID-19 scenario, the pandemic has had a major impact on the country's overall growth trajectory. The growth trajectory has been somewhat tampered by the overall negative impact of the COVID pandemic. And you'll see that donors have, over the last couple of years, donors have been channeling some of the fundings for COVID-related assistance, particularly for improving the overall healthcare systems, for purchasing vaccines, and other social safety and security, transport and energy related investments. And we have seen that given the COVID situation is gradually it's normalizing, the situation is normalizing. There is still a possibility that donor funding would be shifted there. And I'll be covering a few other reasons why donor funding would be shifting in this direction for alleviating the impact of the pandemic. Moving on to the next slide, I would want to focus on a few emerging trends. As we know, Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries. According to the long-term vulnerability index, Bangladesh has been ranked 7. Almost 80% of our floodplains are at the risk of getting inundated during the flooding season. And as we know, as Bangladesh is at a sea level, there is a higher possibility that due to the negative impact of climate changes, there is a possibility of losses of land, and which would lead to potential climate refugees moving to different areas within the year 2050. According to certain studies, this population could be as high as 18 million. And this would be due to sea level rise, salinity, flooding, cyclone, drought, erosion, landslide, among others. And we have already started seeing some of the impact of climate change in terms of higher salinity, in terms of vagaries of weather. So the situation is going to deteriorate in the coming years. And this would have a direct impact on our socioeconomic development as well. Economic loss, according to estimates, show that Bangladesh has suffered a loss of $3.72 billion till date from 2000 to 2029. This is due to loss of livelihood, due to land erosion, loss of crops, and climate change related activities. There has been a number of activities for mitigating the challenges of climate change, particularly in the area of agriculture. As we know, agriculture is still a major sector in the Bangladesh economy, and the sector has been disproportionately harmed by the impact of the climate change. And just to give an example, the Shuffle project has been supporting with sustainable agriculture, and they have been supporting farmers across the board by adopting climate smart technologies, which have been looking to mitigate the impact of climate change. If I can move on to the next slide. As we know, Rohingya crisis is also a major issue. We are all aware of what has happened in Myanmar in 2017. A lot of the political unrest, the military political unrest has led to a shift in the Rohingya population. 700,000 population individuals actually fled to Bangladesh in August 2017, and they're residing in squalid environment in 30+ congested camps in the southern part of the country, in Chittagong region, in Cox's Bazar to be precise. A number of development partners have been working very closely for supporting these Rohingya communities. They have been providing basic access to healthcare services, food, education, vaccination services, and the requirement from the UNHCR stood at $25 billion. Till date, the funding received has been around $28 billion. So there is a possibility that, or there is an increased requirement for more funding in the area of the Rohingya crisis, or for mitigating the challenges of the Rohingyas residing in Bangladesh. As we know, Bangladesh has a very large population. The country has close to 170 million population, with 60% of the population below the age of 35. And the country has around 2.2 million young people entering the job market every year. So we can understand the importance of skill development within the country's economy, country's overall standard. And as we know, we cannot enjoy the benefit of demographic dividend if we are unable to increase the skill level of our young population. And as we know, Bangladesh hasn't been doing too well in terms of skill development. There is a large skill deficit in the country, although there are certain jobs, but we don't have adequate number of skilled people. Alongside, we also have a lot of unemployed people who are not getting jobs, which are getting increasingly filled by people from other countries. If you look at the graduate unemployment rate, it's at an alarming rate of 33%, which shows that there is a clear mismatch in terms of the educational standard of the universities and colleges here and what the employers are demanding. And as we know, 2.2 million, creating 2.2 million jobs would be a bit of a challenge, and you need more investments in enterprise development. Quite a few organizations, development organizations, have been working closely for increasing the skill level of the young population. Alongside, a number of projects have been dedicated towards increasing the number of enterprises, SMEs and enterprises. And a lot of projects have been supporting young entrepreneurs who are looking to start their business, who are looking to expand their business. As we know, country has seen some accelerator programs. LightCastle has also been quite involved with running some of these accelerator programs for supporting SMEs across the board. As we can see, the Swiss government has been investing in quite a few projects. Among others, BYLC and Swiss Contact have also been involved in facilitating higher skill level and also supporting with enterprise development. In terms of good governance, Bangladesh's ranking in the TIB Transparency International Bangladesh ranking is quite low. It's around 13. So there are areas of improvement in terms of good governance. Bureaucratic red tape, corruption are major challenges which are hindering the flow of businesses, which are hindering the growth of the overall economy in general. And there are significant scope for supporting improvement of different institutions within the country, which would also have a direct impact on the country's overall inclusive growth. There are quite a few projects or donors who are focusing on in the area of good governance. USAID is one of the donors. ADB has also invested significant amount, and Asia Foundation is also working very closely in the area of good governance. In terms of the new poor, I was mentioning about the COVID-19 scenario. And this COVID scenario, although Bangladesh has tackled the situation quite well, we have grown during this period, but there has been instances of large-scale unemployment in the economy. This has been due to the fact that many of the workers, close to 70 to 80% of the workers, are currently engaged as informal sector workers, and prolonged period of lockdowns have had a direct detrimental impact on their livelihood. And as a result, government has invested a significant amount to the tune of 300 million USD for supporting the informal sector workers, or also for supporting RMG sector workers who also got also faced difficult challenges in the year 2020-2021 due to loss of orders. And there is a likelihood that this new poor probably would remain in their socioeconomic ladder for the time being, and they probably would require, and they would be requiring significant support, prolonged support from the donors, development partners, and also the government as well, so that they can actually move back to where they were before the COVID-19 situation. Gender is also another key factor or aspect that needs to be covered. As we know, all the major development projects have a gender cross-cutting theme. And in terms of our gender inclusivity, we have gone quite far. In terms, as you can see, our female labor force participation is 36%, which is significantly higher when you compare with the participation rate for India and Pakistan. This is particularly due to the advent of the RMG sector, which predominantly hires females for many of their work. Alongside the MFIs, the microfinance institutions also target females for providing lending. So they are also getting certain support for engaging in self-employment in the rural settings. And as we know, gender also has a significant role to play in the other areas as well. And we have seen from repeated research that if you economically empower women, that has a direct impact on healthcare and education of their family members. And we have probably seen this higher labor participation in terms of higher HDI index, because our child mortality rate, our education level, and our healthcare situation is comparatively better compared to many of our neighboring countries. In terms of the WASH scenario, we have done quite well. The WASH scenario shows that in Bangladesh, at least 99% of the population has access to at least safe wash facilities. Although there are areas for making large-scale investments, Bangladesh has done quite well. There are certain challenges which are there, particularly in terms of arsenic contamination of the groundwater and other things, but we have moved quite far. But there are quite some opportunities for supporting the sector in the coming years through higher investments. If you look at some of the priority areas based on our discussions with different donors and development partners over the last few months, we have seen that these are some of the critical areas which have been identified by the donors and the implementers, which includes climate change that I've mentioned about it. Sustainable agriculture is also one area, because with rising population, we would actually require increase in agricultural production. And with the advent of climate change, sustainable agriculture is also becoming quite critical. Rohingya crisis is part and parcel of what has happened in our neighboring country. Skill development and enterprise development is also a critical part, considering the fact that we have a large young population and a large population is entering the job market every year. Good governance is another area which requires significant attention due to scope for improvement in the democratic institutions and also other opportunities for reducing bureaucratic red tape. Emergence of new poor brought about by the pandemic has also had an impact on the overall situation. Gender gap and inclusion of women are also a critical factor, and sophisticated wash and hygiene behavior changes would also feature heavily in the coming years. In terms of the medium priority, primary education would come in. Although Bangladesh government is spending on schools, there are opportunities for further investing in primary education. Basic healthcare is also one area that has come up during the pandemic, and there is significant scope for investing in basic healthcare. And elementary wash has also already been addressed, and there are some scope for improvement. And as we have seen, food security has been addressed over the last years, and this has been placed in the lower theme. If you look at some of the impending drivers which would be impacting the development sector, we'll see that the majority of the donors, particularly Swiss development corporations, ECAN, and the Canadian donors, have also all moved towards aid to trade. They believe that providing humanitarian aid for the long run might not make sense for an economy like Bangladesh, which is transitioning to the next level, becoming a middle-income nation. It is imperative to support the private sectors through different means, through investments, through technology support, through technology transfer, capacity development, and other means, and through better engagement with international players. And we are seeing this becoming a more mainstream strategy among some of the major donors. Although the other strategy would also remain, because we still have a lot of people residing in the bottom of the pyramid. Market systems is also one area which has gained significant traction. A number of development projects have been focused on or taken a market systems driven approach. Catalyst is one of our famous examples, which has had a major impact on the overall agriculture landscape in Bangladesh. And the trend has been followed by quite a few other projects. AVC has USAID funded. AVC has also Feed the Future. AVC has also had a major impact in the area of market systems development, and we believe that this is increasingly going to become a more mainstream part of the development intervention. We also wanted to share a few strategies that donors can look at when they're looking at Bangladesh as a middle in the coming years. The macroeconomic scenario is also quite important, as I have told you before, that the country is growing and going to become a middle income nation. What does it mean in terms of donor funding strategies? Blend of financing mix. The funding doesn't actually have to be in terms of pure play grant. Can there be opportunities for blended financing, impact investments? Those have also have to be explored. Bangladesh's evolving global image is something which has to be tackled with, since we are no longer going to be an LDC, and also we need to prioritize pertinent areas of need for the coming years, because the situation is rapidly evolving. For the implementers, there are some strategies which can be adopted, which includes increasing the overall efficiency. As we know, the traditional donor funding probably would be dried up. It would be rechanneled to other areas. There are a significant scope for investments in capacity development of the staff, which would lead to higher efficiencies. Usage of technology and data would also bear rich dividend in terms of higher productivity and lower average cost for delivering projects. And prioritizing sustainable development practices. The enterprise development approach would also yield dividend, because not only will donor funding evolve, the nature of donor funding evolve, it might also evolve to impact investment and grant funding, impact investment and blended financing, which would require investment in sustainable initiatives. And we also need to update the scope and the aspect of the projects in general. Thank you for your patient hearing. I will stop here and hand over the floor to Michael. Thank you.
Zahed, thank you so much for that presentation. I just dropped a few kind of comments into the chat that we do plan on doing a broader spotlight on Bangladesh in April that will not focus squarely on nonprofit, the donor kind of nonprofit landscape, but more far-reaching, which I think the US government reached out to us to work with them on that session. So more and more governments are looking to Bangladesh as a destination for this kind of commercial growth that I think you're talking about. So this aid to trade idea. Just thinking through, we're seeing a tightening of regulation on the nonprofit community across Asia. I think folks are familiar with the challenges of operating as a nonprofit in China, in Bangladesh's neighboring India. It's becoming increasingly challenging for nonprofits to move monies in and out of the country. I thought it'd just be interesting to hear from you what the government of Bangladesh's approach and relationship with the nonprofit and NGO community is, and how that's reflected in any sort of regulations that are coming out.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your question. I believe before directly answering your question, I would rather give you a backdrop of the situation in Bangladesh. Just as I have mentioned during the presentation, after independence, Bangladesh's government had inadequate resources to provide a lot of basic services. As a result, a lot of NGOs, local and international NGOs, had come in and provided those basic services in the last mile in the rural areas. And in the 70s and 80s, the government actually understood the value of donors and the development agencies, and they have in many instances, the government and the development agencies have worked hand in hand. If I can give you a few examples, for most of the major projects in Bangladesh, you will find that a government agency is usually included as a formal partner, and they provide all-out support for properly implementing those projects. Alongside, majority of the donors, all the major G2G donors and the major donors actually have an annual discussion with the government. So, and where the government actually showcases the areas where the development agencies can invest money. And many a times, those fundings actually go through the government. So if I could answer your question, the donors and the government is a direct beneficiary of a lot of donor funding, because a lot of funding goes through them, and these have a direct impact, positive impact on the overall perception of the government, which is currently ruling. So it's in their interest to support the development agencies and the donors. However, over the last 6 and 7 years, there have been certain instances of terrorist financing in Bangladesh through the NGO setting, which had led to the government becoming a bit more concerned about the flow of funding. The situation is a bit on the tighter side, but overall, the government has a positive impression about the donor community and the implementation agencies.
So Zahed, in terms of if the money is flowing from foreign governments, public donors to the Bangladesh government, how is that? How are those funds then being distributed to the implementing organizations that actually do the work? Is there? Because I'd imagine there's kind of two layers of who's reviewing those tenders. Is the tender coming from the donor country, or the tender being managed by the Bangladeshi government?
So if I could clarify a bit more, a lot of funding is directly going from the donors to the implementation agencies, but there are certain instances where the government is also involved with the process. For example, government is supporting with a livestock development project of the World Bank, which is a $500 million project. What happens is the World Bank actually deploys consultants and individuals within the setup of the government who actually oversees the process, just to ensure the process is transparent and the funding is deployed in the areas where it's required. Got it.
Okay. Another question I had was just, we've talked a lot about public funding. Interested to hear from you what private funding trends you're seeing, as well as from corporations. Again, I think we're seeing corporate social responsibility spends increase across the globe. Is that something that implementing organizations are seeing in Bangladesh as well?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Michael. CSR, corporate social responsibility, is a fairly new concept in Bangladesh in the way it should be understood. Previously, even 10 to 15 years back, many of the companies thought about CSR as the extension of their marketing activities. So they wanted CSR to be a way through which they can build their brands, and not an instrument to create impact. This is gradually changing. A lot of multinational organizations like Grameenphone and telcos and multinational banks like HSBC, SCB, and a few other large companies are actually investing money. They are investing significant amount. They have a separate CSR wing for independently managing those fundings. Alongside, you'll also see a large number of local companies, particularly conglomerates, investing money, but they don't have, they are spending money, but probably in a haphazard manner. They don't have based on my understanding, they don't have a realistic strategy for implementing, and they have been spending money on an ad hoc basis. But I feel that in the coming decade, CSR would definitely become a very important part of the funding mix, given the fact that a lot of these companies are becoming more formidable in terms of their financial resources, and they have the ability. They would have the ability to invest money in impact-driven activities. But we're still at a nascent stage if you consider the traditional CSR operations.
Right, and there's no regulatory underpinning, as, for example, there is in India for the giving of CSR. There's no requirement of companies to give. There are certain policies, Michael. For example, our central bank, Bangladesh Bank, has a regulation for
investing a certain amount of the company's profit for CSR funding. And the financial institutions are quite active about CSR funding, both local and multinational banks. But usually what happens is they usually don't have a robust strategy for deploying that funding. Many a times what happens is the funding directly goes to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund or some other places. So deployment is a problem for different financial institutions. Based on my understanding, I don't think any other sectors have any kind of regulations which stipulates them to make CSR investments or fundings.
Okay. And Tariq, thanks for your comment in the chat. In terms of the, I'd like to kind of focus a little bit in on public health, just looking at the folks that I know are with us on the line. Can you speak a little bit to the trends specifically within the public health space? I know you had mentioned, COVID-19 relief, but how is that? How is, I guess, what does the landscape look like in terms of public health in Bangladesh, and how is the government and the NGO sectors and the corporate hospitals that might be operating there working to better public health outcomes?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Michael. I think the COVID scenario, the pandemic, has laid bare the shabby state of the public healthcare scenario. The government has not invested adequate amount of money. We have got along well because we have a very young population. Our population, average age of the population is 27 plus currently. So since the aging population hasn't set in, but it would probably set in within the next couple of decades. So the government has been quite lax about investing money in the healthcare sector. And the budget allocation has been less than 5%, 5 to 6% at the latest. So this has been a problem, and we have seen that reflected in the overall situation during the pandemic, when a lot of people required some kind of hospitalization. If you look at the private sector as well, the private sector contributes or caters to a significant part of the healthcare in the urban areas. The overall private sector performance hasn't also been good as well. There has been some deficits. If you look at the rural market, rural sector, you'll see that although government has some upazila level, sub-district level healthcare facilities, a lot of healthcare facilities actually come from donors, from implementation agencies like NGOs. For example, BRAC, which is one of the largest NGOs, global NGOs, headquartered in Bangladesh, have a large healthcare HNPP based intervention across the country, where they provide healthcare and other support services to a lot of rural last mile population. So there are opportunities for significant improvement in public health in Bangladesh.
Thank you. We do have a question in from Jackie. Are there regulations for international NGOs operating in Bangladesh? And I think maybe I'll take a stab at that, Jackie, and then Zahed, turn it over to you. But yes, I think there are, just like most jurisdictions, there'll be a distinction between regulations for tax-exempt nonprofits and regulations for corporate entities. But Zahed, maybe you can go into provide a little bit of additional kind of color.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share some details. As we know, as I've told before, Bangladesh government has an overall positive impression about NGOs, particularly international NGOs coming, particularly from the Western world. There aren't any prohibitive policies, but there are certain policies which have to be adhered with. There is this NGO bureau which has certain requirements for entering Bangladesh. Their certification is essential, particularly for receiving funding. Apart from that, there are certain regulatory requirements, like certain certificates and certain requirements which have to be met in order to enter the market. But the process isn't very difficult.
Yeah, so it sounds like that NGO bureau is kind of the gatekeeper in a way, but the gate isn't too high. and the barriers are not too high for implementing organizations that do want to make impact.
Right. So a nonprofit can also enter via RJC. They can also register as a foundation, as a nonprofit via RJC, register of joint stock company, and that's also even easier to secure.
But with that, you would not have the ability to bring money in from overseas,
right?
Because you have to, right? Okay. So if you're fundraising locally, maybe that's an option. If your funding's coming from outside of Bangladesh, the NGO Bureau route would be the way that you would go to register.
Right.
Exactly. Okay. So, the other thing that I picked up on your presentation is just the importance of skill and enterprise development, and wanted to see if you could just speak a little bit to the higher education landscape in Bangladesh, what that looks like, and if you're seeing, partnerships between local universities and international universities to support skill development, and what does that community look like that's tackling those challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think just as I've told you, we have a very young population. A lot of SSC, HSC, or secondary level graduates are entering, looking for tertiary level opportunities. There are quite a few good universities in Bangladesh, but those are a handful. There are a number of colleges. There are lots and lots of colleges under the national universities, which also provide graduation and post-graduation degrees, but the quality is definitely not up to the mark. In terms of education, there are quite a few good public universities in Bangladesh, but there are also a few large private universities. However, the number of seats are not adequate, and a lot of people are not getting good opportunities. As a result, many of them are having to leave the country for better quality education. If I can give you a specific example, roughly, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 15,000 people have left for the US for pursuing education. A lot of people are moving to the US, to UK, to Europe, and also to Australia, the English-speaking world, for pursuing higher education. So just to summarize, I think there are requirements. There is a need for high-quality education in Bangladesh, and since our per capita income is growing, many people can afford high-priced education based out of Bangladesh.
And we are seeing that because we represent, I think it's 90 different universities from 8 or 9 different countries now, and Bangladesh is moving higher and higher onto the priority list of countries to attract students. And, particularly given, at least in the US's case, some of the fallout from diplomatic relations with China, there's an interest of welcoming students from other parts of the world as well. I guess on that point, I'm just interested, just geopolitically, if you have any things to share. Bangladesh is in a really interesting part of the world, kind of between China and India, and interested to hear from you kind of Bangladesh's relations generally within the region.
Yeah, so I can comment on that. Bangladesh in general has decent relationship with most of its neighbor. If you particularly look at India and China, we have very strong G2G level relationship, people level relationship. A lot of people actually end up going to China for healthcare, going to India for healthcare and education purposes. You'll also find a lot of Chinese here. They're constructing different infrastructures like bridges. The Chinese president visited Bangladesh back in 2016 and pledged close to $24 billion for Bangladesh in terms of investments and infrastructure funding. In that way, Bangladesh has got a strong relationship with China. With India, Bangladesh also has a very good relationship. We got investment assurances of close to $5 billion, although the fund outlet has been on the slower side, but we have a good G2G level relationship. Alongside, for both Chinese and Indian investors, Bangladesh government has set up separate special economic zones so that Bangladesh can receive direct investment from both China and India. So in terms of our relationship, we have strong, steady relationship with both India and China, and we have been able to decouple those relationships. As we know, there are certain challenges between India and China, but we have so far been able to maintain or secure relationship with both the parties without necessarily antagonizing each other.
That's great. That's great to hear. I don't have any other questions atop of my list here. I really appreciate, Zahed, you and the team and the partnership that we have. I'll pause maybe for a minute in case there's any other questions from the audience, but otherwise we can buy back some time onto everybody's calendars.
Sure. Looking forward to more questions.
Any questions from the group? Well, we'll follow up with this presentation for everybody, so you have it in your inbox, as well as I think the recording. But thank you so much for taking the time out with us to learn more about the donor trends in Bangladesh, and hopefully we can take these initiatives forward, these priority areas forward, and work together in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much for everyone in Bangladesh who's stayed up late, including you, Zahed.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.